I felt his heavy breath against my neck while my family's prayers echoed in the next room. It was in that moment that I understood my father's death was only the beginning of my torment. My name is Judith, and I'm 82 years old today. I was born in a small American town where tradition was law and a woman's silence was considered a virtue. I am telling you this story because after more than 60 years, I can finally speak about what happened during those 3 days that changed my life forever. Please subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, and leave a like on this video. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from today? It was the late 50s, and I had just turned 22. I had been married to Donald for almost a year. My father, Walter, had always been my protector, a stern but fair man who had kept my husband in check merely by his presence. Donald feared and respected him, perhaps too much, or maybe it was just a facade. When father fell ill, it was a swift decline. In just a few weeks, that persistent cough consumed him completely. The doctor spoke of a lung disease, but we knew it was a lifetime of hard labor that had finally taken him away. The evening he died, our house filled with relatives and neighbors. My mother, Joyce, was devastated. She couldn't speak, she couldn't organize anything. It was Donald who took charge of the situation, contacting the funeral home, arranging the wake according to tradition. 3 nights of prayers, 3 nights where my father's body would remain in our home before the burial. "Don't worry, Mom," I said, embracing her. "We'll take care of everything." Donald presented himself as so thoughtful, so attentive to details. Everyone praised him for how he was managing the situation. "What an exemplary son-in-law," they said. "Walter can rest in peace, knowing his daughter is in good hands." On the first night of the wake, the house was full. The older women led the recitation in the main parlor, where my father's casket was placed. The smell of candles and flowers was suffocating. "Judith," Donald whispered to me around midnight, "I need to talk to you about something important. Follow me." I followed him to the small room at the back of the house, the one we used as a utility closet. I thought he wanted to discuss some funeral detail, maybe the costs or arrangements with the preacher. As soon as we entered, he locked the door behind him. His face was different. His eyes held a look I had never seen before. "Your father is dead," he said in a voice I didn't recognize. "He can no longer protect you." Before I could understand what was happening, he pushed me against the wall. His hand covered my mouth while the other tore at my black mourning dress. I tried to scream, but his fingers pressed so hard I could barely breathe. "If you make a sound," he whispered, "everyone will hear. Your mother is already devastated. Do you want to bring this shame upon her too?" I couldn't believe this was happening. Just a few feet away, in the next room, my family was praying for my father's soul, while his son-in-law, the man they had praised as a son, was doing this to me. The sound of their prayers penetrated the door. "Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners." When it was over, Donald adjusted his clothes as if nothing had happened. He looked at me with a smile that chilled my blood. "This is our secret, Judith. Remember, you are mine now, completely mine." He left me in that room, trembling and shattered. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, trying to compose myself, to fix my dress, to dry my tears. How could I go back out there? How could I look at my father's body knowing he hadn't been able to protect me? In the end, I had to return to the parlor. My mother looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Where were you, Judith? We looked for you for the final prayer." "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't feel well." Donald was there, standing next to my father's casket, his head bowed in prayer. He looked so respectful, so sorrowful. No one would ever imagine what had just occurred. I didn't sleep that night. I thought of running away, of confessing everything to my mother, of asking my aunt and uncles for help. But where would I go? Who would believe me? It was my word against Donald's, whom everyone admired for how he was handling the funeral. The second night, I knew what was coming. I tried never to be alone, to always stay surrounded by others. But around midnight, as the guests began to leave, Donald took me by the arm. "We need to check if there's enough coffee for tomorrow," he said loudly, for anyone who might hear. "Come with me to the kitchen, Judith." But we didn't go to the kitchen. He dragged me back to that room, and this time it was even worse. His words were crueler, his hands more violent. "Your father is in his box and can't do a thing," he whispered while holding me down. "This is what happens to women who think they're protected." When he finished, he told me I should be grateful. "Plenty of men would have left your mother penniless for the funeral. I'm paying for everything. You should thank me for my generosity." The third night was the final vigil before the burial. My mother was exhausted. Her tears seemed to have run dry. She clung to Donald as if he were her savior. "I don't know what I would have done without you, son," I heard her say. "Walter would be so proud to see how you're taking care of us." Those words hurt more than anything Donald had done to me. My mother didn't know. No one knew. That third night, I tried to lock myself in the bathroom, but Donald had the keys to all the rooms. He found me, and this time he said it would be the last, a goodbye to my father. "Tomorrow we'll bury him," he said, "and life will go back to normal. But I want you to always remember this. Every time you think of your father, you will also think of this moment." After the funeral, we returned to our lives. Donald seemed to revert to the man I had married. Kind in public, respectful, a good worker. But something had changed forever. Every time he looked at me a certain way, every time he came close to me, I relived those 3 days of my father's funeral. Months passed, and then years. I never spoke of it to anyone. Who would have believed me? What would they have thought of me? And then, in time, I learned to endure, to pretend that everything was fine. My mother became increasingly dependent on Donald. He managed her money, her small pension, the decisions about the house that had been my father's. She treated him like a son, praised him to her friends, and told everyone how lucky her daughter was to have such a devoted husband. I had 2 children, a son and a daughter. I tried to be a good mother, to protect them, even though inside me there was a void that nothing could fill. 10 years after my father's death, my mother became gravely ill. The doctors said there was nothing they could do. Donald, as always, took care of everything: the medications, the doctors, the visits. Everyone admired him for his devotion to his mother-in-law. "He's a saint," the neighbors would say. "They don't make many sons-in-law like that." One evening, while I was alone with my mother at the hospital, she took my hand. Her face was drawn, her eyes sunken. She knew the end was near. "Judith," she whispered in a voice so faint I had to lean in to hear her. "I have to confess something before I go." I thought she wanted to talk about my father, perhaps some family secret she had never revealed. "I heard you," she said, tears in her eyes, "during your father's funeral. I heard you in that room with Donald." The blood froze in my veins. I looked at my mother, incredulous. "You knew," I could barely whisper. She nodded weakly. "I knew. I heard everything. But I was afraid, Judith. I was afraid he would leave us with nothing, that we wouldn't be able to bury your father properly." I was weak and scared. Tears streamed down her wrinkled face. He made me promise not to say anything. He said he would take care of me, that he would never leave me without a roof over my head. And I agreed. I chose myself instead of protecting my daughter. I didn't know what to say. For 10 years I had carried that secret, believing I was alone. And all that time my mother knew. She had chosen silence. "I'm sorry, Judith," she whispered. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." Before I could answer, Donald entered with the doctor. My mother closed her eyes, pretending to sleep. That night, as I drove home with Donald, everything became clear. It hadn't been a moment of madness during the funeral. It had been a plan. He had taken advantage of my mother's weakness, blackmailed her with the promise of financial security, and she, terrified of being alone, had accepted. I realized that for 10 years I had lived with two betrayers, my husband, who had abused me at the most vulnerable time of my life, and my mother, who had chosen silence to save herself. It was in that moment that I decided I would no longer suffer in silence. I didn't know how yet, but I knew that one day Donald would pay for what he had done. And I would make sure he remembered every single moment, just as he had wanted me to remember my father. My mother died 3 days after that confession. I didn't have time to tell her whether I forgave her or not. Perhaps it was better that way. I wasn't sure I had an answer, and sometimes lies are kinder than the truth. The mystery of her 10 years of silence and the chilling realization of Donald's calculated move had become a heavy weight. I was no longer just the victim of those 3 nights, but of a decade-long psychological imprisonment enforced by the very person who should have protected me. The question lingered, an icy claw in my soul. How far did Donald's plan truly go, and did it start even before my father died? I was about to find out. The story of those 3 days was only the first layer of a much deeper betrayal. Her funeral was different from my father's. Fewer people, fewer tears. 10 years had passed, and many of the old family friends were gone. Donald, as always, took care of everything. The same funeral director, the same candles, even the same prayer ritual. I wondered if he did it on purpose to torment me, to remind me of those 3 nights. This time, however, he didn't touch me. Perhaps because our children were present, or perhaps because he didn't need to anymore. The damage had already been done years ago. During the wake, I found myself watching Donald as he spoke with relatives, accepted condolences, and wiped away tears that I knew were false. I now saw something I hadn't noticed before, the quiet satisfaction in his eyes, like a spider who had woven his web and could now enjoy the fruits of his labor. With my mother, Joyce, dead, there were no more witnesses to what had happened. Only he and I knew the truth, and he was certain I would never speak. Life went on after the funeral. Our children were growing up. Richard was 9 and Connie 7. They were my only joy, the only reason I continued to live in that house, with that man. For them, I pretended that everything was fine, that their father was a good, respectable man. One day, while I was cleaning out my mother's old house, Donald had decided we would sell it. I found a box hidden beneath the floorboards in her bedroom. It contained some of my father Walter's old letters, his pocket watch, and a small, worn, leather-bound journal. That evening, when everyone was asleep, I began to read my father's journal. Most of it contained daily thoughts, worries about work, concerns for the family's future. But then I found some pages that made my hands tremble. "I don't trust Donald," my father had written 6 months before he died. "I've noticed discrepancies in the factory accounts. Small sums missing, orders paid for twice. It might be an error, but I am increasingly convinced he is stealing. I don't have enough proof yet, but I'm keeping a close eye on the situation. I don't want to accuse him without being sure, especially for Judith's sake. But if my suspicions are correct, I will not allow that man to remain in my family." The following pages described how my father was gathering evidence, documenting every irregularity. The last entry was dated 1 week before his death. "Tomorrow I will confront Donald. I have all the proof I need. God forgive me. But if I had known what kind of man he was, I would never have allowed him to marry my daughter." My father never had that confrontation. The illness struck him suddenly, and within a week, he was gone. I replayed everything that had happened. My father's sudden illness, Donald taking control of the funeral, the 3 nights of abuse, the pact with my mother. It hadn't been a coincidence. It hadn't been a moment of madness or opportunism. Donald knew my father was about to expose him. Perhaps he had even hastened his death. And then he had used the funeral not only to humiliate me, but to ensure my mother was entirely under his control. It had all been planned, from the very beginning. A cold, calculating rage filled me, unlike anything I had ever felt before. I went through all the journal pages, absorbing every word, every suspicion my father had noted. There were dates, figures, names. It wasn't just my word against Donald's anymore. There was evidence, but it wasn't enough. I had to be careful. Donald was a respected man in the community, a successful businessman. He had managed to deceive everyone for years. If I made one false move, I risked losing my children. I decided to start slowly, methodically. First, I hid my father's journal in a secure place. Then, I began searching for other records, old factory ledgers, invoices, orders, anything that could confirm my father's suspicions. It wasn't easy. Donald kept everything locked away in his study, and woe to anyone who dared enter without his permission. But I had learned patience. During the day, I was the perfect wife, the devoted mother. At night, when everyone was asleep, I became an investigator. I discovered that Donald had continued to steal, not only from the factory, which he now managed completely after my father's death, but also from my mother's savings. Small sums every month, never enough to arouse suspicion, but which over the years had grown into a substantial sum. One evening, while searching through his papers, I found something I didn't expect: photographs, pictures of Donald with another woman. The dates on the back showed the relationship had been going on for years, perhaps even before our marriage. There were also love letters, appointments marked on his calendar. I thought of my children, how they would react if they discovered what kind of man their father truly was. Richard adored him, wanting to follow in his footsteps in business. Connie was more reserved, but she always sought his approval. How could I protect them while also getting justice? It was then that I began to elaborate a plan. It wouldn't be quick. It would require years of patience, of meticulous preparation. But in the end, Donald would pay for everything. For my father, for me, for my mother, for the stolen money, for the lies, for the betrayal. I started setting aside small amounts of money, hiding it where Donald would never think to look. A little from the grocery allowance, a bit from the money he gave me for the children's clothes. After a year, I had put together enough to open a secret bank account in another city. I befriended the local pharmacist, an older gentleman who had known my father well. I told him I suffered from insomnia, that I needed something to help me sleep. In time, his trust grew, and he began giving me increasingly stronger sleeping pills without too many questions. I carefully studied Donald's habits, his weaknesses, his routines. I noticed he always drank a glass of red wine before dinner, always took the same route to work, and had the same fixed weekly appointments with his lover, Doris. I also approached a lawyer, an old school acquaintance who now worked in a nearby city. I told him I wanted to write a will, that I wanted to ensure my children were protected. Gradually, I began discussing other matters with him: inheritance laws, financial crimes, and women's rights in case of marital infidelity. My children were growing up, unaware of everything. Richard had become a bright teenager, determined to follow his father's footsteps in business. Connie was more sensitive, more introverted. Sometimes I caught her looking at me with a gaze that seemed to say, "I know something is wrong, Mom." One day, Connie came into the kitchen while I was preparing dinner. She was a young woman then, and a wisdom in her eyes that went beyond her age. "Mom," she suddenly said, "why aren't you happy?" Her question caught me by surprise. I thought I had played my part well, that I had hidden my pain and rage behind a perpetual smile. "What makes you think I'm not happy, honey?" I replied, continuing to chop vegetables. "I see you, Mom. At night, when you think everyone is asleep, you sit by the window and cry. Sometimes I hear you talking to yourself, like you're arguing with someone." I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to lie to her, but I couldn't tell her the truth either. Not yet. Every woman has her moments of sadness, Connie. It's part of life. But I have you and your brother, and that gives me joy. She looked at me, not entirely convinced. Is it because of Dad? Is he hurting you? A shiver ran down my spine. Was it that obvious? Had she noticed something? No, honey, I lied. Your father is a good husband. It's just that sometimes I think of Grandma and Grandpa and I miss them. She nodded, but I saw in her eyes that she wasn't completely satisfied with my answer. From that day on, I was even more careful. I couldn't afford to hurt my children, to involve them in this dark story. In the meantime, my plan proceeded slowly but surely. I had gathered sufficient evidence of Donald's financial crimes, saved enough money to start over elsewhere if necessary, and had even located an apartment in another city where I could move with my children. But it wasn't enough. I didn't just want to flee, I wanted justice. I wanted Donald to feel the same sense of helplessness, humiliation, and betrayal that I had felt during those 3 nights. I wanted him to lose everything he held dear, just as he had made me lose my innocence, my trust, and my respect for my mother. It was then that I started mixing the sleeping pills into his red wine. At first, only a small dose, just enough to make him feel tired, distracted. Over time, I gradually increased the quantity. I wanted his health to deteriorate slowly, for clients to lose confidence in him, for his lover to tire of an increasingly weak and confused man. I often wondered if what I was doing was right, if revenge would truly heal the wounds of the past. But then I remembered his words during my father's funeral. Every time you think of your father, you will also think of this moment. And I knew I couldn't let it go. I couldn't let him get away with all the harm he had done. One evening, while serving dinner, Donald complained about feeling unwell. "This is the 3rd time this week," he said, rubbing his temples. "These headaches are killing me." "Perhaps you should see a doctor," I suggested, with feigned concern. No, it'll pass. It's just work stress." But it didn't pass. The symptoms worsened: dizziness, nausea, confusion. Eventually, he was forced to consult a doctor who found nothing specific. "It's probably just nervous exhaustion," was the diagnosis. "He needs more rest, less stress." Donald began working fewer hours, delegating more tasks to his employees. Richard, now helping out at the company part-time, suddenly found himself with greater responsibilities. "Dad's not doing well," Richard told me one evening, worried. "He signed a contract today without even reading it. That's not like him." "Your father has been working too hard for years," I replied. "Perhaps it's time to slow down." As Donald's health deteriorated, I continued gathering evidence of his past crimes. I now had a complete file: my father's journal, accounting records showing the embezzlements, the photographs with his lover, and testimonies I had collected over the years from former employees, suppliers, and clients who had been cheated or swindled. It was during this period that I also began writing my memoirs, a detailed account of everything that had happened during my father's funeral, my mother's silence, and the years of psychological abuse that followed. Writing helped me maintain my sanity, to remember why I was doing all this. One night, as I was in the kitchen writing, Connie entered silently. I hadn't noticed her presence until she spoke. "What are you writing, Mom?" I quickly closed the notebook. "Nothing important, honey, just old memories." Connie, now a young woman, looked at me with those eyes that seemed to see right through me. "Does it have to do with Dad? With what's happening to him?" Her tone wasn't accusatory, but curious. "Worried, perhaps." "Why do you ask?" I inquired, trying to remain calm. "I saw you, Mom, putting something in his wine. Not once, but many times." I felt the blood freeze in my veins. All these years of careful planning, and my daughter had seen me. What could I tell her? How could I explain it? Connie, I started, but words failed me. I won't say anything, she interrupted. I don't know what's going on, but I know there must be a reason. I know you, Mom. You would never harm anyone without an important reason. I looked at her, stunned by her maturity, her intuition. For a moment I considered telling her the truth, but then I thought of how painful it would be for her to know what her father had done, how he had betrayed our family. One day I will explain everything, I promised, but not now. Please trust me. Connie nodded. I trust you, Mom, always. From that day on, I was even more cautious. I knew Connie suspected something, but she seemed to have decided to stay on my side, whatever the truth was. Donald continued to deteriorate. Doctors were now speaking of a possible neurological condition, but tests showed nothing conclusive. He had lost weight, his skin had turned sallow, and his hands trembled constantly. The company began to suffer. Clients walked away, suppliers became demanding with payments, fearing the business was in trouble. Richard tried to hold everything together, but he was too young, too inexperienced. It was then that I decided the time had come. I couldn't allow the company my father had built with such effort to collapse, dragging my children's future down with it. It was time to implement the final phase of my plan. Donald continued to control me like a puppeteer manipulates his puppet strings. Every day, every moment, I felt his gaze on me, as if he wanted to ensure my spirit was still bent to his will. After what happened in that back room during my father's funeral, something inside me had broken, but he couldn't know it. Our house, which I once considered a refuge, had become an invisible prison. The walls seemed to watch me, judge me, reminding me that I couldn't escape. My mother, with her silent complicity, made that cage even more suffocating. The months passed in a limbo of despair and resignation. Donald would come home every evening, sit down at the table, and talk about work, colleagues, and future projects as if he were the most normal man in the world, as if those 3 nights in the funeral house had never existed. He would smile at me across the table, ask me to pass the bread, and comment on how good the dinner I had prepared was. "You are so lucky to have a husband who provides for you," my mother often said when we were alone. "So many women would want to be in your place." Those words were daggers to my heart. I wondered if she truly knew what happened during Dad's funeral, if she imagined the words Donald had whispered to me while holding me down in that room. "Your father can no longer protect you now," or if she simply chose not to see. A part of me wanted to scream, to tell her everything, to ask her for help, but every time I looked into her eyes, I only saw that blind devotion to Donald, that admiration for the man she believed was our family's savior after Dad's death. It was during those months that I began to observe my mother more closely. I noticed her furtive glances toward Donald, the way she lowered her eyes when he entered the room, how she avoided contradicting him even in the most insignificant matters. I wondered if she too was afraid of him, if she too was trapped in some way. The first glimmer of light came unexpectedly, about a year after Dad's death. It was a spring afternoon, and I was hanging clothes in the backyard. My mother came out with another basket of laundry, and for a few minutes we worked in silence, side by side. "Your father would be so disappointed," she suddenly said, her voice barely audible. I stopped, a sheet still in my hands. "What are you talking about, Mom?" She continued hanging the laundry, her eyes fixed on the clothes, as if she dared not look at me. "About how you let Donald take over, about how you allowed him to do this to you." I felt the blood run cold in my veins. You knew?" "Of course I knew," she replied with a bitter laugh. "The walls of the funeral home are thin, Judith, and your father in that casket wasn't the only person present that night." And my hands were trembling so badly that I dropped the sheet. I picked it up mechanically, trying to organize my thoughts. "You were there? You heard everything and didn't do anything? What was I supposed to do?" Her voice was a mixture of resignation and bitterness. I was a widow with debts, penniless. Donald was our only hope. He paid for the entire funeral. He settled your father's debts. Without him, we would have ended up on the street. So you sold me? The words came out before I could stop them. My mother finally looked at me, and in her eyes I saw not guilt, but a strange justification. I gave you a future, a roof over your head, a husband who provides for you. A husband who did those things to me while you were on the other side of the door. Lower your voice, she hissed, looking around nervously. You don't understand how the world works, Judith. Men have needs, and women must adapt. Your father was no different. That sentence hit me like a slap. Dad would never have hurt me. No, but he hurt me, she replied with a sad smile. Do you think I married for love? I was young like you, and my father owed money to his. A convenient marriage to settle accounts. I felt breathless. My entire childhood, all the memories I had of my parents, suddenly seemed tainted by this revelation. But you seemed happy. You learned to pretend, Judith. You learned to smile, to say the right things, to be a good wife. That's what women do. That's what you must do too. I remained silent, unable to respond. My mother went back to hanging the clothes, as if we hadn't just spoken of things that had destroyed my life, as if it were all normal, inevitable. Don't tell him we talked about this, she added after a while. Donald must not know that I know. It would be complicated. That night, I didn't sleep. My mother's words kept tormenting me. Was this truly the destiny of women? To accept, to pretend, to endure? Had my father really done to her what Donald had done to me? And if so, why had she allowed it to happen again, to her daughter? The terrible weight of my mother's decades-long complicity, driven by financial fear, became a terrifying parallel to my own entrapment. She saw my suffering as an inevitable cost for security, an ancient tax women had to pay. The idea that she had faced a similar, though perhaps less overtly cruel, transactional marriage to my father was a shock, raising a new, horrifying question about the nature of our family's foundation. What other hidden truths lay beneath the perfect surface of our seemingly respectable life, waiting to be unearthed? I knew the answers would be devastating, but I couldn't stop the search now. In the following days, I observed my mother with new eyes. I saw the small rebellions hidden behind her apparent submission, how she sometimes forgot to prepare Donald's favorite dishes, how she made small purchases without telling him, how she allowed herself moments of freedom when he wasn't around. One morning, while Donald was at work, I found the courage to confront her again. I found her in the kitchen preparing lunch. "Mom, how did you endure it all these years?" She didn't turn around, continuing to chop vegetables. "You endure, Judith. You find a way. But I don't just want to endure. I want to live." My mother stopped, the knife suspended in midair. Living is a luxury few women can afford. "Can't we run away?" My voice was a desperate whisper. "Go away. Start over somewhere else?" Finally, she turned to look at me, and in her eyes I saw an infinite weariness. "With what money? To go where? Do you think a man like Donald would let us go so easily? He has friends everywhere, Judith. He would find us. So we should stay here and accept all this forever?" My mother returned to chopping vegetables, the rhythm of the knife on the cutting board punctuating her words. "No, not forever. One day Donald won't be here anymore, and then you'll be free." "That could take a lifetime. Or maybe not," she said with a strange calm. "Your father left suddenly, didn't he? No one can predict when death will decide to knock." There was something in her tone that made me shiver. It almost sounded like she was suggesting, no, it was impossible. My mother would never think of such a thing. "What if there's another way?" I asked, lowering my voice even further. She looked at me for a long moment, then shook her head. "Don't talk nonsense, Judith. You have a husband, a home, soon you'll have children. Accept your life and find a way to be happy in the small things." Children. The thought terrified me. The idea of bringing a child into that house, leaving them at Donald's mercy. No, I couldn't allow it. It was then that I decided to take matters into my own hands. If my mother had chosen to accept that fate, I would find a way to change mine. I didn't know how yet, but I had to try. In the following months, I started behaving exactly as my mother had suggested. I became the perfect wife. I smiled at Donald, prepared his favorite dishes, and listened to his stories about work with feigned interest. At night, when he came to our bed, I closed my eyes and let my mind wander elsewhere, to a place where I was free, where no one could touch me. Donald seemed to appreciate the change. He started bringing me small gifts, talking about buying a bigger house, about having children. He proudly introduced me to friends and colleagues as my wife, Judith, as if I were a trophy to be displayed. While playing this part, however, I was observing, learning, planning. I started putting aside small sums of money, hidden in a flour jar at the back of the pantry. I befriended the wives of Donald's friends, trying to figure out which of them might be trustworthy. I memorized his schedule, his habits, his weaknesses. One afternoon, while cleaning his study, I stumbled upon a small black notebook hidden in a drawer. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside, in Donald's neat handwriting, were lists of names, dates, and figures. At first, I didn't understand what it was about, but then, reading more carefully, I realized they were records of loans, with impossible interest rates. Donald was lending money to desperate people, demanding double, triple what he had given in return. This was how he financed our comfortable life. This was how he had paid for my father's funeral and his debts. Not out of generosity, as my mother believed, but as an investment, knowing that in return, he would get me. Continuing to flip through the notebook, I found something that chilled my blood. My father's name, Walter, appeared several times, with increasingly larger sums next to the dates. Donald had been lending him money for months, perhaps years before his death. I went back to my mother with that discovery, hoping she would finally open her eyes. "I already knew," was her surprising response. She was sitting in the rocking chair on the porch, her hair gathered in a severe bun, her eyes fixed on the embroidery in her lap. "How did you know? Why didn't you say anything?" My voice was a mix of disbelief and anger. "Your father was too ashamed to tell me, but I found the receipts." Donald had been lending him money for his business, which was failing. Then, when your father couldn't pay anymore, Donald kept raising the interest. "But that's illegal." "Many things are illegal, Judith, yet they happen every day." Her needle pierced the fabric with mechanical precision. "Your father grew sick with worry. His heart couldn't take it." I felt a knot in my throat. "Are you saying Donald is responsible for Dad's death?" My mother looked up, and in her eyes I saw a hardness I didn't know. "I'm saying your father died of shame and worry, leaving us neck-deep in debt, and Donald was there, ready to save us, provided you became his wife." I felt faint. You accepted this deal?" "What choice did I have?" Her voice was weary, resigned. "You were already promised to him. The marriage had already been set. Your father had consented months before he died, when he still hoped he could repay the debt." I sank into the chair next to her, my legs too weak to support me. "So everything, the courtship, the love, was all a lie?" "Oh, I'm sure Donald genuinely desired you," my mother replied with bitterness. "He had been looking at you that way since you were little more than a girl. Your father never noticed, but I did." And when the debt started piling up, Donald saw his opportunity. "And you let him!" My voice rose, full of anger and pain. "Lower your voice," my mother hissed, looking around nervously. "What did you want me to do? Refuse and end up on the street? See you marry some farmer and live in poverty? Donald had means, social standing. He could give you a life you otherwise never would have had. A life of abuse and humiliation. A life of compromise," my mother corrected, "like all women's lives." We stared at each other in silence, separated by an abyss of understanding. For her, what I had endured was just the price to pay for financial security. For me, it was an unforgivable betrayal. "Is there anything else I should know?" I finally asked, my voice reduced to a whisper. My mother returned to her embroidery as if the conversation had exhausted her. "Donald isn't just a loan shark, Judith. He has his hands in many dirty dealings. People in town are afraid of him, even though he smiles and donates to the church on Sundays." "What kind of dirty dealings?" "The kind that lands men in prison. Or worse." She gave me a meaningful look. "That's why I'm telling you to be cautious. Don't do anything foolish. A man like him won't let you go easily." That evening, as I prepared dinner waiting for Donald's return, my mind worked feverishly. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, even my father's death, was a lie. I had been sold to repay a debt, sacrificed on the altar of respectability and financial security. Donald came home later than usual, the smell of liquor and cigars preceding him. He sat down at the table, talking about work, clients, and how lucky I was to have him as a husband. I watched him as he spoke, truly seeing him for the first time. Not a respectable businessman, but a predator who had taken advantage of my father's weakness, who had planned everything from the start. "Is something wrong, Judith?" he asked, noticing my fixed gaze. "You're strangely quiet tonight." I smiled, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "No, Donald. I was just thinking about how lucky I am." He smiled back, pleased, completely unaware of the thoughts crossing my mind, thoughts of escape, of freedom, and perhaps of revenge. That night, as Donald snored beside me, I made a decision. I would not be like my mother, resigned to a life of silence and suffering. I would not accept this as my destiny. Somehow, I would find the strength to change my story. But first, I needed to know everything. I had to discover how deep Donald's dirty dealings went, what his weaknesses were, who his enemies were. Knowledge is power, and for too long, I had been kept in ignorance. The next day, I began my secret investigation. When Donald was at work, I sifted through his documents, listened to his phone calls, observed who came to look for him. In the evenings, when he went out with friends, I followed him at a distance, hidden in the shadows, seeing where he went, who he spoke to. Slowly, painfully, I began to piece things together. Donald wasn't just a loan shark, lending money at impossible rates. He was involved in smuggling, extortion, and the corruption of public officials. He had contacts with dangerous people, men who spoke little and carried concealed weapons under their jackets. It was on one of those nights of surveillance that I saw him enter a building I knew well, the house of Doris, the young widow who lived on the other side of town. I waited outside for hours, hidden behind a tree, until I saw him leave, straighten his clothes, and look around furtively before walking away. I wasn't surprised. Somehow, I had always known or suspected it. Donald wasn't the type of man to be content with just one woman. I returned home before him, washed up and got into bed, pretending to be asleep when I heard the door open. I felt his weight on the mattress, his arm possessively encircling me, the scent of a perfume that wasn't mine on his skin. The next day, while Donald was at work, I went to visit Doris under the guise of bringing her freshly baked cookies. She was a young and beautiful woman with large, sad eyes and a small child playing nearby. "You're very kind to visit me, Judith," she said, inviting me in. Not many women in town speak to me since I became a widow. I sat at her table, observing the modest but clean house. It must be difficult raising a child alone. She lowered her eyes. It is, but we manage. Your husband, has he been dead long? 2 years, a workplace accident. Her voice was flat, as if she had repeated that story too many times. I'm sorry. I paused, searching for the right words. If you need help of any kind, you can count on me. Doris looked at me with surprise. Thank you, but why are you being so kind to me? Because I think we have more in common than it seems. Her eyes widened in understanding, then filled with tears. You know? I nodded. I saw him last night. Doris covered her face with her hands. I'm so sorry, Judith. I didn't want to, but he promised to help me with my husband's debts, with the baby. You don't have to apologize, I gently interrupted. I know Donald better than anyone. I know how his help works. We talked for a long time that afternoon. Doris told me how Donald had approached her after her husband's death, offering financial aid in exchange for favors. How she felt trapped, with no way out. If only I could leave this town, she whispered. Start over somewhere else, where no one knows us. Why don't you? With what means? And where would I go? Donald would find me, you know that. The same words my mother had used, the same invisible chains that kept all of us imprisoned. As I walked home, my mind was full of turmoil. How many other women were there like Doris? How many other lives had Donald manipulated and destroyed with his help, his debts, his lies? That evening, I prepared dinner with particular care. I put on the dress Donald preferred, lit candles on the table, and poured his favorite wine. When he returned, he seemed pleasantly surprised. To what do we owe this celebration? He asked, kissing me on the cheek. No special occasion, I replied with a smile. Just a way to show you how much I appreciate you. He smiled, pleased. You've become quite the good wife, Judith. During dinner, I got him to talk about work, about business, letting him boast about his successes. Then, casually, I mentioned Doris. Poor woman, I said. It must be hard for her to raise a child alone after her husband's death. Donald stiffened slightly, but his expression didn't change. Yes, a sad situation. Some people say her husband's accident wasn't really an accident. I saw him swallow, his eyes avoiding mine. People talk too much in this town. They say he had debts, like my father, debts with dangerous people. Judith, his voice was a warning, you shouldn't listen to gossip. It's not gossip if it's true, Donald. I stared directly at him, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. I know everything about your business. I know about Doris, and probably other women. I know what you did to my father. Donald slowly put down his glass of wine. His face was a mask of calm, but I could see the storm raging behind his eyes. You don't know what you're talking about. I know all too well. I rose from the table, suddenly unable to bear his closeness. I know you're a loan shark, a fraudster. I know you pressured my father until you caused his heart attack. I know you forced my mother to give me to you in exchange for canceling the debts. Donald stood up too, his face suddenly hard. So what? What do you plan to do with this information? Nothing for now, I replied, surprised by my own calmness. I just wanted you to know that I'm no longer the naive girl you married. I see who you really are, Donald. He stared at me for a long time, then burst out laughing. A cold, humorless laugh. So what? What changes, Judith? You're still my wife. This is still my home. I am still the man who decides your fate. He took a step toward me, and I had to force myself not to step back. You can know all my secrets. You can hate me all you want, but in the end, you're still here. And you'll stay here, because you have nowhere else to go." His words were cruel, but true. In that moment, I understood that knowledge alone wasn't enough. I needed a plan, the means, and allies. "You're right, Donald," I finally said. "I'm still here." "But things will change. Be careful, Judith," he warned me, his voice low and menacing. "Men like me don't appreciate threats, and women who talk too much often end up regretting it." That night, I slept in the small utility closet, unable to bear his presence in our bed. Donald didn't insist. Perhaps he was too angry, or perhaps he knew that after our conversation, something between us had definitively broken. At dawn, when the house was still immersed in silence, I tiptoed out and went to the backyard garden. The fresh morning air had a calming effect on my agitated thoughts. I sat on the old wooden bench, watching the sky slowly lighten. It was there that my mother found me an hour later. She sat down beside me, wrapped in her shawl, her knotted hands clasped in her lap. "You talked to Donald," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "I told him I know everything." My mother sighed deeply. "That was imprudent. I had to. I can't continue living in a lie. And now? What do you think will happen?" I shook my head. "I don't know. But I can't pretend anymore, Mom. I can't smile and pretend everything is fine." She remained silent for a long moment, then said in a whisper, "There is a way out." I looked at her, surprised. "What is it?" "It's not a way a mother should suggest to a daughter." Her eyes were fixed on a distant point. "But sometimes, when a man is as evil as Donald, nature finds a way to restore balance." "What are you trying to tell me, Mom?" She turned to look at me, and in her eyes I saw a determination I hadn't known she possessed. "Donald has many enemies, Judith. Men he has swindled, families he has ruined. All it would take is a word in the right place." "Are you suggesting—" I couldn't even complete the sentence. "I'm not suggesting anything," my mother replied quickly. "I'm just saying that every chain has a weak link. Find it, and you'll be free." She stood up, tightening the shawl around her shoulders. "I'm going to make breakfast. Donald will be waking up soon." I watched her walk away, amazed by this new version of my mother. Not the submissive woman who had silently accepted her fate, but a survivor who had learned to navigate the dangerous waters of life with a man like Donald. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps the answer wasn't in running away, but in finding the weak link in the chain that held me captive. That morning, as I served Donald breakfast, I watched him with new eyes. No longer with fear or disgust, but with cold determination. I studied his every gesture, every word, searching for clues, weaknesses, vulnerabilities. Donald ate in silence, avoiding my gaze. The discussion the previous evening had left a tense atmosphere between us, but somehow I felt stronger. I had finally stopped being the passive victim and had taken control of my own destiny. I didn't yet know what the next step would be, but for the first time in a long time, I felt something powerful and dangerous growing inside me. Hope. The revelation about my father's murder and my mother's knowledge was a turning point, moving me from victim to strategist. But my mother's final cryptic words, "Every chain has a weak link. Find it, and you'll be free," opened a terrifying new question. Was she subtly encouraging an act of justice, or something darker? The key to my freedom, it seemed, lay not just in exposing Donald, but in finding the one person he truly feared, the one man whose vengeance would be far more brutal and final than anything I could plan. Who was this hidden enemy, and how could I, a seemingly powerless wife, possibly find him before Donald crushed me? The search for this weak link was my only chance. Almost a year had passed since that morning in the garden with my mother. A year in which my life had profoundly changed, not externally, where everything seemed the same, but within me. I had learned to move in the shadows, to observe, to listen. My mother's words about the chain and its weak link had given me a purpose, a direction. I was no longer just a victim of circumstances, but a strategist, patiently planning my liberation. Donald and I lived like strangers under the same roof. After that confrontation, something had definitively broken between us. I continued to fulfill my duties as a wife. I prepared meals, kept the house tidy, accompanied him to church on Sundays. But an invisible wall separated us. He knew it, I knew it, but neither of us dared to speak of it openly. What Donald couldn't imagine was how much I had changed. I was no longer the naive young woman he had married, nor the traumatized wife he had abused during my father's funeral. I had become a shadow in his life, silent but ever present, gathering information like a spider spins its web. It was during this period that I started visiting Doris more often. Our friendship, born from sharing a painful secret, had grown into an alliance. She told me about other women Donald had manipulated, about shady deals whispered in the town's alleys, about enemies he believed he had defeated but who still harbored grudges. "You have to be careful, Judith," Doris told me one day while our children played in the yard. Yes, I finally had a son, Richard, born 9 months after that terrible night in the funeral home. He was named after my father, Walter. I couldn't look at him without seeing Donald's eyes, but I forced myself to love him anyway. It wasn't his fault, after all. "Donald has eyes and ears everywhere," Doris continued. "If he found out we were talking like this—" "He won't find out," I reassured her. "He thinks I'm too stupid to be a threat. That's exactly what makes him dangerous. He underestimates women. He thinks we are just objects at his disposal." I nodded, feeling the familiar wave of cold anger that I had learned to control. That is his weakness, a weakness we can exploit. Doris looked at me with a mixture of admiration and fear. "What are you planning, Judith?" "Not enough yet," I replied honestly, "but I am gathering information, and soon I will have a plan." That plan began to take shape one late summer evening when Donald returned home later than usual, visibly agitated. He poured himself a glass of wine, then another, pacing nervously in the kitchen. "Did something happen at work?" I asked, feigning interest while setting the table for dinner. "Nothing that concerns you," he replied curtly. Then, as if reconsidering, he added, "Problems with a client, nothing important." But I knew it was important. I could tell by the way his hands trembled slightly, by how he kept looking over his shoulder, as if afraid someone might be listening. The next day, while Donald was at work, I went to see the only person who could give me information without arousing suspicion, my mother, Joyce. I found her in the garden, hanging laundry. Despite having the means to hire help, my mother still took care of the housework herself, as if manual labor was a form of penance for her. "Have you heard anything about Donald having trouble at work?" I asked her, helping her hang a sheet. She gave me a quick glance, then returned to focusing on the laundry. "Why do you ask?" "He came home late yesterday, seemed worried." My mother remained silent for a moment, then said quietly, "There is a man, a certain Jerry Stone. He was a client of Donald's. He owed him a lot of money." And now he's back. They say he made a fortune abroad and has returned to settle his debt. In his own way. A shiver of excitement ran through me. "What do you mean?" My mother looked around nervously, then moved closer. Jerry was a desperate man when Donald lent him that money. His wife, Evelyn, was sick. She needed expensive treatment. When he couldn't pay, Donald took his house, his store, everything. Evelyn died shortly after. Some say of a broken heart, more than sickness. Jerry swore revenge before disappearing. "And now he's back," I concluded. "Yes," my mother confirmed. "And he's not the desperate man he once was. He's wealthy, powerful, has connections. Donald is afraid of him, though he would never admit it. That evening, while cradling Richard before putting him to sleep, my mind worked feverishly. Jerry Stone could be the key, the weak link in the chain that held me captive. A man with a personal motive for revenge against Donald, with the means and determination to carry it out. But how to approach him? How to talk to him without attracting Donald's attention? The answer came in a completely unexpected way the next day. I was at the market with Richard when I noticed a man I had never seen before, tall, with salt and pepper hair and a demeanor that spoke of authority and confidence. He was bargaining with a fruit vendor, but his dark eyes scrutinized the square as if he were looking for someone. Instinctively, I knew it was him, Jerry Stone, the man Donald feared. With my heart pounding, I approached the same fruit stand, pretending to be interested in the produce. Richard, in his stroller, played quietly with his rattle. "The peaches are particularly good today," the man said, noticing my interest. "They really are," I replied, taking a piece of fruit and smelling its fragrance. "I don't think I've seen you at the market before." He smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I recently returned to town, after many years abroad." "It must be strange to return after so long." "It is," he nodded. "Some things have changed, others are exactly as I left them." His eyes rested on Richard. "Your son is beautiful. How old is he?" "Almost 2, I replied, stroking the child's head. "His name is Richard." "A fine name," he commented. Then, with apparent nonchalance, he added, "You must be Mrs. Valenti, Donald's wife." I felt the blood freeze in my veins, but I maintained an impassive expression. "And you are?" "An old acquaintance of your husband's, Jerry Stone." He offered his hand, which I briefly shook. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you. I've heard a lot about you." "I hope positive things," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "Naturally," he smiled again. "Your husband is a lucky man." There was something in the way he said it that made me realize he knew. He knew the kind of man Donald was. Perhaps he even knew the kind of marriage we had. "The lucky man is the one who knows how to recognize his own luck, Mr. Stone," I replied meaningfully. A flash of understanding crossed his gaze. "Indeed, Mrs. Valenti. Indeed." We took our peaches and said goodbye like two strangers who had just met by chance. But we both knew something important had just happened. That evening, after putting Richard to bed, I went to the kitchen where Donald was drinking his usual glass of wine. I sat down opposite him, observing him in silence. "What is it?" he asked, annoyed by my gaze. "I met an interesting person at the market today," I said calmly. Donald barely looked up from his glass. "Oh, really?" "A certain Jerry Stone. He said he was an old acquaintance of yours." The glass slipped from his hands, and the red wine spilled onto the table like blood. What did he tell you?" "Nothing in particular," I replied, secretly enjoying the terror in his eyes. "We just exchanged a few words while I was buying peaches. He seemed like a kind man." Donald abruptly stood up, grabbing my arms. "Stay away from him, do you understand? That man is dangerous." "You're hurting me, Donald," I said calmly. He let go as if burned, running a hand over his face. "I'm sorry, but you have to promise me to stay away from him, never speak to him again." "Why? What did he do to you?" "It's none of your business," he snapped. Then, trying to calm down, he added, "Trust me, Judith, that man only wants to use you to get to me." "And why would he want to get to you?" Donald looked at me for a long time, then shook his head. "It doesn't matter. Just promise me you'll stay away from him." "I promise," I lied. I couldn't sleep that night. Donald's reaction had confirmed my suspicions. Jerry Stone truly was his weakness, the crack in his armor. And now I knew that Jerry had also noticed something about me, about my situation. The next day, I left Richard with my mother and returned to the market, hoping to see Jerry again. He wasn't there. Not the next day, nor the one after. I was about to give up when, on the fourth day, I saw him sitting at the town square cafe, reading a newspaper. I approached cautiously, looking around to make sure none of Donald's friends were nearby. "May I sit down?" I asked when I reached his table. Jerry looked up, surprised to see me, then nodded. "Please." I sat down across from him, suddenly unsure of how to begin. "Does your husband know you are here?" Jerry asked, folding the newspaper. "No," I admitted. "He explicitly ordered me to stay away from you." And bitter smile curled the man's lips. I imagined so. "Mr. Stone, Jerry, please." "Jerry," I corrected. "I am not here by chance. I need your help." He studied me carefully, as if trying to read the truth in my eyes. "What kind of help?" I took a deep breath. It was the moment of truth. "The kind of help only an enemy of Donald Valente can offer." Jerry stiffened, looking around cautiously. "That is a dangerous conversation, Mrs. Valente." "Judith," I said, "and I think we both know how dangerous Donald can be." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Jerry leaned slightly forward. "My wife died because Donald Valente took everything from us," he said quietly. "The house, the savings, even the medicine she needed." I saw him smile at her funeral, as if he only came to make sure she was truly dead. A lump formed in my throat. "I'm sorry. I spent 10 years abroad with only one thought, to return and take revenge on the man who destroyed my family." His eyes were cold, determined. "And now you, his wife, come to me asking for help. Why should I trust you?" It was a legitimate question. I looked at my hands, then decided only the truth could convince him. "Do you know what Donald did to me during my father's funeral?" Jerry shook his head. I told him. Not the details. I couldn't bear to relive those moments, but enough for him to understand. I also told him about my father's debt, how I had practically been sold to Donald to repay it. I told him about Doris and the other women, the veiled threats, the gilded cage I lived in. When I finished, Jerry's face was dark with rage. "That man deserves to burn in hell." "Perhaps," I agreed. "But first, he must pay here on earth." Jerry looked at me with a new respect. "What do you have in mind, Judith?" "I don't know exactly yet," I admitted. "But I know you have resources that I don't. Connections, information, and above all, you have nothing to lose." "And you do?" I thought of Richard, of his innocent smile. "My son. I don't want him to grow up with a father like Donald, but I can't risk losing him." Jerry nodded understandingly. "A child changes everything. So, will you help me?" He seemed to think for a long time, then stood up. "Come with me." I followed him through the town's narrow streets to a small house on the outskirts of the center. It was modest but well-maintained, with flowers in the windows and a blue-painted door. "It was my parents' house," he explained as he opened the door. "The only thing Donald couldn't take from me because it wasn't in my name." Inside, the house was simple but cozy. Jerry led me into a small living room, then disappeared into another room. He returned with a folder, which he placed on the coffee table between us. "I've been gathering information on Donald for years," he said, opening the folder. "Before I left and then from abroad, paying people to keep an eye on him. I know every dirty deal he's involved in, every woman he's manipulated, every official he's bribed." I stared in amazement at the documents, the photographs, the transcriptions of conversations. "It's incredible." "It's not enough to send him to prison, not yet," Jerry clarified. "Donald is too clever. He has too many friends in the right places, but it's enough to start causing him trouble." "How?" Jerry smiled, a humorless smile. "By hitting him where it hurts the most, in his wallet and his reputation. In the days and weeks that followed, I met Jerry regularly, always cautiously, always with an excuse ready in case anyone saw us together. He told me his plan: to start spreading compromising information about Donald's dealings among his most important clients, to contact some creditors, to suggest he might not be as solvent as he seemed, to sow doubt about the legality of his business with the authorities. "We don't have to do anything illegal," Jerry explained. "Just plant the seed of doubt, let the distrust grow. Donald built his empire on fear and respect. If we take those away from him, everything will collapse." The plan was risky but brilliant, and I had a crucial role to play. "You are his weakness, Judith," Jerry said during one of our meetings. "He doesn't know it yet, but you are. He thinks he has you under control, that he knows you. He doesn't suspect you could be anything more than a submissive wife." "And how does that help us?" I asked. "You can give us information that no one else can have. You know who he sees, what deals he's conducting, where he keeps important documents." It was true. Living with Donald, I had access to valuable information. I could see his ledgers, overhear his phone conversations, notice who came to see him late at night. "And there's more," Jerry added. "Donald trusts you, in his own way. He doesn't see you as a threat. You can influence him, suggest ideas to him, make him make bad decisions." That thought frightened and fascinated me at the same time. Using Donald's trust against him, manipulating the manipulator. "I don't know if I'm capable of that," I confessed. Jerry took my hands in his. It was the first time he had touched me, and it was a gentle, respectful contact, so different from Donald's. "You are stronger than you think, Judith," he said gently. "You have endured the unbearable and are still here, still standing. You have an inner strength that Donald can never understand because men like him mistake cruelty for strength." His words touched me deeply, awakening a part of me I thought had long been dead. In the following months, I put the plan into cautious practice. I began showing a renewed interest in Donald's business, listening to his stories about work, asking him questions, feigning admiration for his cleverness. Flattered by this new attention, he gradually let down his guard. "You've changed, Judith," he told me one evening as we dined. "You seem different." I smiled, lowering my eyes as I once did. "I'm just trying to be a better wife, Donald, to understand you more." He seemed pleased, unaware that every piece of information he gave me went straight into Jerry's hands. The plan was working. Slowly but surely, things began to change. Some of Donald's important clients became warier. Some loans were not renewed. Nothing blatant, nothing that would make him suspect a coordinated attack, but enough to create small cracks in his empire. Donald became more irritable, more suspicious. He stayed out late at night, drank more than usual, and talked in his sleep about problems at work. But the real turning point came in a completely unexpected way, as often happens in life. One evening, while Donald was out on business, I was in his study looking for some documents Jerry had asked for. Richard, who was now almost 2 years old, was playing quietly on the rug next to me. It was then that I heard footsteps in the hallway. Someone had entered the house. Terrified, I shoved the documents into the drawer and picked up Richard, looking for a place to hide. But before I could move, the study door opened, and my mother, Joyce, appeared, pale and agitated. "Mom, you scared me to death. What are you doing here?" She quickly closed the door behind her. "Judith, you have to leave immediately. Donald knows everything." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What? How?" "He saw you with Jerry Stone today at the market. He followed you. He heard you talking." My mother approached, taking my hands in hers. "He's furious, Judith. I've never seen him like this. He said that he will teach you what happens to traitorous wives." Panic overwhelmed me. "We have to go. You, me, Richard. Right now." My mother shook her head. "I'm staying." I can slow him down, buy you some time, but you have to go now before he returns. But Mom! Don't argue. Her voice was firm, determined. I failed as a mother for too long, Judith. I didn't protect you when I should have. Let me make amends now. Tears blurred my vision. Please, come with us. I can't, she replied with a sad smile. I'm old. I would only slow you down. And someone has to stay to face Donald, to give him an explanation that doesn't immediately make him suspect you. What will you tell him? That you went to visit a sick aunt with Richard. That I advised you to leave immediately without waiting for him. I will lie to him, Judith, as I lied to myself for years, believing that silence could protect us. I hugged her tightly, Richard squeezed between us. I love you, Mom. I love you too, my daughter, she whispered against my hair. More than I ever knew how to show you. She pulled away from me, quickly wiping her eyes. Now go. Jerry is waiting for you at the old Moretti farm. He will take you to the border, where you will have a new identity and a new life ready for you and Richard. How do you know that? Because I helped him arrange everything, she replied with a small smile I had never seen before. Do you really think I didn't know what you were plotting with Jerry? A mother always knows, Judith, and this time I chose to stand on the right side. The sudden, terrifying realization that Donald knew everything, coupled with my mother's astonishing act of courageous protection, made the past year of plotting seem like a childish game. She, the woman who had preached acceptance, was now sending me into the night, risking everything to save her daughter and grandson. But what exactly had she arranged with Jerry? Her cryptic mention of helping organize the escape suggested a deeper, more calculated involvement. The question wasn't just how she knew, but what else she had planned to face Donald and buy me time. The answer to that unknown was what truly filled me with both dread and desperate hope as I fled. There was no time for more words. I grabbed a small suitcase that I always kept ready in the closet, stuffing in a few things for Richard and a few personal items. My mother, in the meantime, prepared a bundle with food and water. The path behind the garden, she said, as she led me to the back door. Follow the stream to the fork, then turn right. The Moretti farm is about an hour's walk. We hugged one last time. Then I went out into the night, Richard pressed tightly to my chest, covered by a blanket to protect him from the cold. The path was dark and uneven, but I knew it well. I used to play there as a child, before Donald came into my life. I walked as fast as possible, whispering comforting words to Richard, who, strangely, seemed to understand the gravity of the moment and remained quiet. I arrived at the Moretti farm exhausted and frightened. It was a building abandoned for years, surrounded by unkempt fields and wild trees. For a moment I feared I had taken the wrong path, or that Jerry wasn't there. Then I saw a faint glow coming from a window and approached cautiously. "Jerry?" I called out softly. The door opened and he appeared, his face etched with worry. "Judith, thank God. I was afraid you wouldn't make it." I stepped into the farm, my legs threatening to give way from exhaustion and tension. "Donald knows everything," I said, trying to catch my breath. "My mother warned me. She helped me escape." Jerry cursed under his breath. "We have to go now, then. The car is out back." "Where are we going?" "First to the city, then we'll see." "I have friends who can help us, give you a new identity, a job, a home." "And after that?" Jerry looked me in the eyes. "And after that, you will be free, Judith. Free to live the life you deserve, you and your son." As we loaded our few belongings into Jerry's old car, a thought suddenly struck me. What about my mother? What will Donald do to her when he finds out I've fled? Jerry took my hand. "Your mother made her choice, Judith. A brave choice. And she is not as defenseless as you think." He smiled enigmatically. Let's just say I left her something that might surprise Donald if he gets violent. I didn't ask for more. At that moment, I had to concentrate on Richard, on our escape, on the possibility of a new life far from Donald's shadow. As the car sped away into the night, I looked back just once toward the lights of the town shrinking in the distance. I was leaving everything I had ever known, everything I had ever been. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something that resembled hope growing inside me. 40 years passed since that night I fled with Richard from the house that had become my prison. 40 years of a new life, far from Donald's shadow, the weight of memories, the constant fear. The big city welcomed us as only a large, indifferent place can, allowing us to get lost in the crowd, to become invisible. The first few months were difficult. We lived in a small rented room in the suburbs where the sound of trains marked our days. Richard adapted with the resilience typical of children, while I struggled with recurring nightmares, with the fear of seeing Donald suddenly appear around every corner. Jerry kept his promise. Through trusted friends, he secured me new documents, a job as a sales clerk in a small grocery store, and most importantly, the chance to start over. He stayed with us for a few weeks. Then one morning, I found only a note on the table. "I have to go back to settle some things," he had written. "You and Richard deserve a new life, without shadows of the past. You are a strong woman, Judith. Stronger than you think. Never forget that." I never saw him again. Months later, I learned, through a local newspaper an acquaintance sent me from the old town, that Jerry Stone had been found dead in his apartment. An apparent suicide, the article said. But I knew the truth. Donald had discovered his role in my escape and had taken his revenge. I mourned Jerry in silence, adding his name to the list of people Donald had destroyed. And I wondered what had happened to my mother. I had tried to contact her several times, always with extreme caution, but I had never received a reply. Her silence tormented me. Was she alive? Was she safe? Or had Donald... No, I couldn't allow myself to think the worst. I had to focus on Richard, on our new life, on the future. The years passed. The city became our home. Richard grew up strong and intelligent, so different from his father that sometimes I wondered how he could carry his blood. At school, he excelled, made friends easily, and laughed often. And every laugh of his was a small victory over Donald for me. I myself began to change. From sales clerk, I became manager of the store, and then, with savings accumulated and a small loan, I opened my own grocery store. Small, but mine, completely mine. I made new friends, learned to trust again, slowly, cautiously. And then I met Alan, a history teacher who often came into my store. A kind, patient man with eyes that always smiled. At first, I was wary, frightened, but he wasn't in a hurry. He respected my pace, my silences. Richard adored him, and in time, I learned to trust him. I never told him the whole truth about my past, only that I had fled a violent husband. It was enough. He understood, didn't ask questions, and only offered his support, and gradually, his love. We built a life together, the three of us. A simple but serene life made up of small daily joys, family dinners, vacations by the lake, of normalcy. That normalcy that had seemed an unattainable luxury for so long. It was during this period of quiet that the letter arrived. A simple envelope, with no sender, postmarked from my hometown. Inside, a handwritten sheet with handwriting I immediately recognized. "Dear Judith," the letter began. "If you are reading these words, it means I have finally managed to find you. Do not fear, I have taken all necessary precautions to ensure this letter cannot be traced. It was my mother, Joyce, alive, safe." "Donald reacted as expected to your escape," she continued. His rage was terrible, but I was ready. The item Jerry had left me was a handgun, and when Donald tried to force me to reveal where you had fled, I pointed it at him. I didn't actually intend to use it, but he didn't know that. The fear in his eyes. It was like looking at a mirror of all the terror he had inflicted on others for years. I stopped, my hands trembling. The image of my mother, the woman I had long considered weak and submissive, pointing a weapon at Donald, was almost impossible to conceive. I didn't shoot, the letter continued. I simply told him that if he tried to look for you, if he harmed me or anyone else, the authorities would receive a complete file on his dirty dealings. The file actually existed. It was a copy of what Jerry had collected over the years. Our agreement was simple. He would leave both of us alone, and I would keep the file safe. I read and reread that letter multiple times, trying to assimilate every word, every revelation. My mother had protected my escape, kept Donald at bay, and found the courage she had repressed for years. Donald is no longer the threat he once was, she continued. Over the years, his enemies multiplied. Business is bad. His reputation is ruined. Many of his victims have found the courage to speak out, inspired by your escape and that of other women. The castle of lies and fear he built is crumbling, brick by brick. And then came the sentence that changed everything. Donald is dead, Judith. 3 weeks ago. A heart attack in his office. He passed away alone, with no one to hold his hand, with no one to truly mourn him. I heard it from an old friend who still lives in town. Donald was dead. The man who had turned my life into a nightmare, who had abused me, who had caused Jerry's death, no longer existed. I didn't cry. I felt neither joy nor sorrow, only a deep, immense relief. It is time to come home, my daughter, the letter concluded. Not for him, but for yourself, to close the circle, to reclaim what belongs to you. The house is yours now, as are all of Donald's assets. He left no will, and as his legal widow, you are the sole heir. Come back, Judith. Come back with your head held high. The idea of returning terrified and attracted me at the same time. Returning meant facing the ghosts of the past, reopening wounds I had painstakingly tried to heal. But it also meant closing a chapter, finding closure, perhaps even a form of justice. I spoke with Alan that evening after Richard had gone to sleep. I told him everything from beginning to end. The marriage to Donald, the abuse, the escape, the new identity. He listened in silence, his hands clasped around mine, his eyes moist with tears that were not for himself, but for me, for what I had endured. I have to go back, I finally said. I have to see with my own eyes that it's truly over. I understand, Alan replied, and we will come with you, me, and Richard. We will face this together. The journey to my old town was surreal. As the train crossed familiar landscapes, I felt like I was traveling not only through space, but also through time, returning to a past I had desperately tried to leave behind. Richard, now 42, was excited by what he considered an adventure. For him, the old town was just a place to explore, not the site where his mother's most painful memories were buried. Alan, on the other hand, was silently protective, always by my side, a reassuring presence in the whirlwind of emotions that overwhelmed me. The train station was as crowded as I remembered. The smell of coffee, the voices of people, the sound of arriving and departing trains. Nothing seemed to have changed, yet everything was different. A taxi took us to the address my mother had indicated in the letter. It wasn't the house where I'd lived with Donald, but a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood of the city. She opened the door. My mother, older, more fragile, but with a light in her eyes I had never seen before. For a long moment, we stood still, looking at each other, unable to speak. Then we embraced, tightly, as if wanting to recover all the lost years in that single gesture. "You've returned," she whispered against my hair. "You've finally returned." I introduced Richard, whom she observed with eyes full of wonder and tears. "He is so big, so handsome," she said, stroking his face with trembling hands. "The last time I saw you, you were just a baby." Alan introduced himself, and my mother welcomed him with a spontaneous hug. "Thank you," he simply said. "Thank you for loving my daughter when I didn't know how to." We spent that first night talking, remembering, sometimes crying, but also laughing, which I never thought possible. My mother told me about the years after my escape, how she had finally found the strength to leave Donald's house, to rebuild a life for herself, to help other women who were in the situation I had been in. "I failed you," she said at one point during the night, her eyes downcast with shame. "I didn't protect you when I should have. I left you in that man's hands. I closed my eyes to the truth. I can never forgive myself." I took her hands, those hands that now seemed so small and fragile. "You were trapped too, Mom, in a different way, but you were just as much a prisoner as I was. But you eventually found the courage to flee. I did not." "You're wrong," I replied. "You found the courage that night, when you helped me escape, when you faced Donald with a gun in your hand." That gesture changed everything. The next day, my mother accompanied me to the house that had been Donald's. It stood there, imposing and dark as I remembered, but now it seemed smaller, less threatening. The gates were rusty, the garden overgrown. The air of abandonment that enveloped the building was almost palpable. "No one has lived here for years," my mother explained as we walked up the driveway. "After the business started going badly, Donald sold almost everything. In the end, he lived almost like a recluse, with few servants, increasingly paranoid." The door opened with a sinister creak. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust and memories. The furniture was covered with white sheets, like silent ghosts of a past life. I walked slowly through the rooms, touching objects, observing details I had forgotten. Here was the sofa where Donald sat to read the newspaper. There was the table where we ate meals in a silence heavy with tension. Upstairs, the bedroom I had shared with him, where every night had been torture. And finally, Richard's room. His cradle was still there, covered in dust, with the small teddy bear I had bought him, and that we hadn't been able to take in our hasty escape. It was there that I finally cried. Not for Donald, but for the young woman I had been, for the terrified mother who had to choose between security and her child, for all the years lost in that house of shadows. My mother held me close as I sobbed, stroking my hair as she had when I was a child. "It's over," she murmured. "It's truly over, Judith." When I calmed down, she led me to Donald's office. The room was as I remembered it, austere, dominated by a large, dark wooden desk. Here he conducted his business. Here he planned his maneuvers. Here he counted his dirty money. "There's something you need to see," my mother said, heading toward a painting on the wall. She moved it, revealing a safe. "The combination is the date of your wedding," she added bitterly. He never lacked irony. Inside the safe were documents, money, some photographs. But what caught my attention was a small black velvet box. I opened it slowly. It contained the engagement ring Donald had given me so many years before. That ring I had left behind in my flight, the one that for years had represented my prison. "Take it," my mother said. "It's yours, like everything else." I looked at that ring, so beautiful and so terrible at the same time. Then I closed it in the box and put it back in the safe. "I don't want it," I said. "I don't want anything from this house, from this life." "I understand," my mother nodded. "But legally it's all yours. The house, the few remaining assets, the bank account. You can do whatever you want with them, sell them, donate them, burn them." In that moment, looking at the house that had been my prison, I had an epiphany. "I want to transform it," I said. I wanted to become a refuge for women like me. Women fleeing situations of abuse, who need a safe place, a new beginning. My mother looked at me, her eyes full of pride. "That's a wonderful idea, Judith. Will you help me?" "With all my heart." In the following days, we set the project in motion. We contacted lawyers, social workers, associations. Donald Valente's house, the man who had terrorized so many women, would become a refuge for his own victims. A perfect nemesis. Alan and Richard returned to the city after a week. They had their lives, their families, their work. I stayed longer to oversee the renovations, to organize everything, to close that chapter of my life once and for all. One afternoon, while checking the work in the garden, now renewed with flower beds and benches, I noticed a woman watching me from the gate. She was elderly, stooped with age, but in her eyes was a light that seemed familiar. "Can I help you?" I asked, approaching her. She smiled, a sad and sweet smile at the same time. "You are Judith, aren't you? Donald Valente's wife." I hesitated, then nodded. "I was, a long time ago." "I am Evelyn," the woman said. "Evelyn Stone." Stone, like Jerry. My heart stopped for an instant. Was he your relative?" "His wife," she simply replied. "Or rather, I was, before Donald destroyed our lives." I invited her in, offered her coffee, and listened to her story. She told me about their love, the illness that had struck her, the debts Jerry had contracted to treat her, how Donald had taken everything. "They told him I was dead," she said, her eyes lost in painful memories. And it was true, in a way. The illness had brought me close to death, but at the last moment a new treatment, a miracle, perhaps. "And Jerry didn't know?" I asked, incredulous. "No. When I recovered, he had already left, convinced he had buried me. I tried to look for him, but he seemed to have disappeared into thin air. Only years later did I learn that he had returned here, that he had confronted Donald, and that he had died." Tears blurred my eyes. "Jerry saved me," I said. "He helped me escape from Donald, to start a new life. He died for it." Evelyn squeezed my hands. "Then he died doing what he had always wanted to do, protecting someone he loved." We remained silent for a long moment, united by the memory of a man we had both loved in different ways. "Your project," Evelyn finally said, "this refuge for women. Can I help? I have experience as a nurse and all the time in the world." I hugged her, feeling a circle close, a broken story resuming its course. The inauguration of the refuge took place a year after my return to town. We called it Casa Speranza, a simple name for a place meant to be a new beginning for so many women. Alan and Richard came for the occasion, as did many town residents, journalists, and local authorities. But the real guests of honor were the women who already occupied some rooms, women who, like me once, were trying to escape situations of abuse, to rebuild a life, to find their own voice. My mother and Evelyn were ever present, tireless in their support. Two women who had known the deepest pain but had found the strength to transform it into compassion. That evening, as I watched the sunset from the garden of the house that had once been my prison, I felt a peace I had never known. I had completed a long, painful journey, from terror to freedom, from despair to hope. Donald was dead, but I was alive, more alive than ever. I had a wonderful son, a partner who loved me for who I was, a mother who had finally found the courage to truly be one, and a project that gave meaning to all the pain I had lived through. I remembered the words Jerry had written to me in that note, so many years before. "You are a strong woman, Judith, stronger than you think." He was right. I was strong. I had survived, and now, finally, I was free. As the first stars appeared in the night sky, I made a silent promise to all the women who would find refuge in that house. You are not alone. Your story, does not end with pain. There is always a way out, always a possibility of rebirth. If I made it, you can too. The wind carried away my words, but the promise remained, strong and clear as the stars in the night sky. Thank you for listening to me today, for allowing me to share with you this intimate chapter of my life. If my story has touched you, please don't hesitate to leave a like on this video and subscribe to this channel to discover other testimonies like mine. And please share it, because who knows? Maybe someone going through a similar trial right now will find the courage to keep searching, to hope, to believe in the impossible. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from today? Thank you from the bottom of my heart for listening to me.